There's going to be a recession. It's going to be bad. Unemployment is going to go up. It's coming. I mean, the recession is coming. And Jay Powell said this. I mean, Jay Powell gave two speeches, and the September 21st speech was almost like, well, just in case you weren't listening to me in Jackson Hole, let me tell you again what's happening. And in Jackson Hole, he was like Nancy Pelosi. He tore up a speech and wrote a new one, like literally the day before. It was 3 or 4 pages. It was really short. He used the word pain 3 times in one paragraph. I've been following Fed news for 45 years. I've never seen the word pain ever. But he basically said the same thing. But September 21st, he was even more blunt. He said, there's going to be a recession. It's going to be bad. Unemployment is going to go up. Get it straight. These things are going to happen. And that's what it's going to take to get inflation under control. But he went on and on about how inflation was job one, because the dual mandate is price stability and low unemployment. Okay, those two things don't always go together. And sometimes you got to make trade-offs between the two. But right now, the trade-off is very easy, which is unemployment's really low. Now, I don't put much weight on it, but the Fed does. Again, put your Fed hat on. Unemployment's really low. If unemployment went from 3.5, 3.6 at the moment, if it went to 4.5, 4.9, is that the end of the world? Well, that was considered pretty low in 2013 when they were doing QE4 or whatever. So they're willing to do that. And they also think the recession, if it comes, will be mild. But those two things together will get inflation under control. What Powell said, I mean, their target is core PCE, personal consumption expenditure, price index, core meaning excluding food and energy. And everyone's like, why would you exclude food and energy? Again, I'm not here to debate it. That's what they do. So if you want to think like a Fed head, that's what they do. They want to get core PCE year over year to 2%. It just came in at 5.2, which was up from August. So September was 5.2. August was about 4.7, give or take. It just went up. It's not going down. So, but they're trying to get it down. Now Powell did not say we're going to raise rates until core PCE is 2%. He didn't say that. What he said was we're going to raise rates until it's acting in a restrictive way on inflation, and inflation will come down on its own because rates will be high enough to cause that. At which point we the Fed will pause. And you say, well, when are you going to cut rates? He was like, the pause could be a year. So you're talking, forget this Fed pivot nonsense. You're talking 2024, if then, before they cut rates. But in the meantime, so they've got to get rates high enough. So they're going to go, 75 basis points in November. December, who knows? We'll know closer to the date. It'll either be 50 or 75. It's going up, probably going to go up. I have the calendar for 2023. There's a meeting February 1st and another one in late March, I think March 22nd. They'll probably raise it both of those. They're going to get rates up to 5-ish. At that point, they probably will have achieved the goal of bringing core PCE down, but they will also have destroyed the economy in the process. It's like I remember in Vietnam, the old saying, we had to destroy the village to save it. We have to destroy the economy to save it. This is the latest in a long string of Fed blunders since 1913. Seems to be their specialty, but that's what they're doing. They could at least pause now. If everything I said is correct, and obviously I think it is, or I wouldn't be saying it, but if we're on the verge of a global liquidity crisis, as revealed by the Eurodollar futures curve and the Treasury yield curve, and negative swap spreads and Treasury bill auctions with the yield to maturity below what the Fed will give you for a phone call. I mean, all those things are happening. That's hard data, and it's a very troubling sign. Last seen in 2008, by the way, before the Lehman Brothers meltdown. If all that's happening and the fundamental signs are also weak, which we just saw in third quarter GDP, which is based on net exports, which won't last. How are you going to drive a trade surplus with the strongest dollar in 20 years? Good luck with that. I mean, nobody can afford our stuff, and we're not buying anybody else's stuff. With the economy going into a recession on its own, with a global liquidity crisis brewing, why on earth is the Fed raising rates at all? Every headline you looked at, website, commentators, supply chains breaking down. They couldn't get cream cheese to make cheesecakes at Junior's, the world's most famous cheesecake place, and on and on and on, like a long list. And then last spring was the baby formula shortage, which was serious. I mean, mothers couldn't feed their children. So it was very bad. And I talked to my editor about the book. We said, okay, let's do it. So I've got 3 chapters to start. One on, just anecdotal stuff, kind of thing I just mentioned. How bad is it? Chapter 2 is why. What what caused it? When did it start? But I found some really, really interesting research, because everyone says, well, yeah, COVID messed it up and the war in Ukraine messed it up. Well, that's true, but it didn't start there. This started in 2018 with Trump's tariffs, because I'm not here to debate the tariffs. I actually think the tariffs were a good idea, but that was the start of the supply chain breakdown. Because when Trump put tariffs on, started with appliances, washing machines, refrigerators and stuff, and then solar panels, and then they just kept piling on. The US and Brazil are the two largest exporters of soybeans. China is the world's largest importer of soybeans. China was buying all their soybeans from the United States just as a way to kind of make it up a little bit. Like, well, we got to buy the soybeans anyway. Why not buy them from the US to keep the US-China trade deficit under control so it doesn't become too politically toxic? Well, as soon as Trump threw on the tariffs, China retaliated by moving their soybean orders to Brazil, stop buying US soybeans. That's not a phone call. I mean, you're talking about vessels, port facilities, agriculture, trucks. How do you get the soybeans to the ports? How many do you grow? Where's the fertilizer coming from? Et cetera, et cetera. And all those parties, the shippers, the cargo, the insurance companies, and so many people involved, banks, letters of credit, it's just a lot involved. They don't like short-term relationships. They say, okay, I'll do it. I want a 5-year contract. And China said, okay. So they reconfigured all those transportation lanes to get the soybeans from Brazil. All of a sudden, you're a U.S. soybean grower. You say, well, what do? Well, we started selling them to the Netherlands because the Netherlands needs soybeans too. But now, instead of shipping them from like Port of LA to Ningbo and near Shanghai, we're shipping them from Port of Houston to, I don't know, France, in Marseille or someplace. You completely scrambled all these supply chain relationships, and they break down. It's not that it's the end of the supply chain. I actually start the book. I have an introduction where I talk about a Bronze Age vessel, a wreck in a place called Uluburun, which is off the southern coast of Turkey, that was discovered by a sponge diver in the 1980s, and then it was excavated. It was the most perfectly preserved Bronze Age cargo they've ever discovered. But what was in it, and I have the inventory list and a lot of research on it, there was amber from the vicinity of the Baltic Sea. There was gold, which at the time came from Sudan. There were swords, which at the time came from Damascus or present day Israel and Lebanon. There was oil, olive oil from Italy, etc. There was a carving of Queen Nefertiti, which was bound for her in Alexandria, Egypt. The point being, this vessel was doing a counterclockwise circuit of the Mediterranean Sea, based on the winds, picking up and dropping off cargo all along the way. But that supply chain, if you go from, like Sweden to Sudan, it's almost the Arctic Circle to the equator, and from present day Iran to Spain, that's 5 million square miles. So there's nothing new about supply chains. We can document to the Bronze Age. What was new, beginning around 1989, was supply chain science. The combination of vastly improved computing power, artificial intelligence, new algorithms, and more sources of data that could be put together and used by experts to optimize and make the supply chains more efficient. That was new. And it kind of began with the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the Soviet Union. And Berlin Wall fell in 1989. Soviet Union dissolved in 1991. I talked to the guy who, this is a worldwide endeavor, but he was probably the single most responsible individual for all the significant developments in the supply chain in the last 30 years. And he said to me, Jim, you have to understand, it took us 30 years to build it. We blew it up in 3 years. It's not going to come back overnight. It's going to take 10 years or more to rebuild it. And what I talk about in the book is supply chain 1.0, which is 1989 to 2019, and then supply chain 2.0, which kind of starts now, but is going to go indefinitely because it's going to take a long time to put this together. It's like dropping a vase and it breaks into 1,000 pieces. You can't put it back together. You got to go buy a new vase. And that's what's going on with the supply chain. There will be a supply chain, there always is, but the new supply chain will look very different from what we've just come through, because the whole 30 years of period I'm describing was built on efficiency, lower cost, lower cost, lower cost. It was kind of the Walmart model. So yeah, just-in-time inventory, everyone knows about that, but there's something called cross-stocking. That's where a truck pulls up at a warehouse and you unload it. And instead of putting the stuff in the warehouse, you move it to another truck that then goes to a destination. The stuff never goes in the warehouse. Inventories are very expensive. They're costly to finance. You got to move the stuff around. It's called picking, pick the stuff off the shelf with you. I used to drive a forklift, so I know a little bit about it, and put it on a truck. I used to unload trucks too. Hey, I've got 7 suppliers. Why don't I cut it down to 3 and do bigger contracts with each one and get lower unit costs? I've got 5 transportation lanes. Why don't I cut that down to 2, get everything to, Los Angeles and Seattle, as the case may be, et cetera. And they did it for 3, and they got costs lower, and Walmart and Amazon were the champions of this, but everyone else was doing it. But they missed something. What they missed was that while they were getting those unit costs lower for consumers, there were hidden costs, and the main hidden cost was you were creating greater frailty. This whole system was subject to a massive, massive breakdown. What happens if you have two suppliers and they both go on strike? What happens if you have one port of entry and it's backlogged? What happens if you've got cross docking and warehouses and there aren't enough trucks? There are 80,000, we need 80,000 drivers, 80,000 drivers. Wish they'd hire them instead of these IRS agents, but it is breaking down all across the board. Now, can it be put back together? Yes, but the biggest difference between 2.0 and 1.0, so you'll still have trading partners, you'll still have outsourcing, you'll still have transportation lanes, but it'll be members only. It'll be basically democratic, kind of liberal republics, Western Europe, the EU, of course, US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, and some others. India, I would expect to be included. Friendly nations, but China's out. We're decoupling from them. They're decoupling from us. This isn't US driven. The US is participating, but this is what China wants too. Both sides are decoupling as fast as they can. China can develop its own network, maybe Central Asian republics, some Southeast Asian suppliers and so forth, but they're going to lose customers. Well, most of their customers actually in the United States. We won't buy their stuff and we won't sell them our stuff, particularly high-tech stuff. So the world's going to break and these new clubs are going to be formed and there will be trade and there will be transportation lanes, but it'll be much more restrictive. Now, will prices be a little higher? Yes, but it'll be more secure.